Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Tepes was a real guy who used to torture the enemy and impale them on spikes.
Number 10. Giulia Tofana. In the 1600s, women who were left under the control of malignant husbands who would physically harm and control them was a rather common issue, and the general rule was that unless your spouse passed away, that was the only time a woman could be granted her freedom. The active contents inside the vial with the artwork of St. Nicholas were unknown, but mostly it was filled with arsenic, lead, and possibly belladonna. It was colorless, tasteless, and therefore easy to mix with many other substances like wine or water. It was called by the name Aqua Tofana, and it was named after the suspected Giulia Tofana, as she was the main distributor and ringleader of this secret sauce. The actual creator might have actually been another woman who was caught later on. The poisoning of Aqua Tofana would go unnoticed, as its symptoms would mimic other illnesses that were prominent at the time. First dosage would mimic a cold, the third dosage digestive issues, and the fourth was death. It was so effective and helpful that when the poison was used in a slow active state, it would give the victims the assumption that they were dying and would write a will and repent. And if the provider of the poison changed their mind, the antidote was simply lemon juice and vinegar. Although the invention of this poison substance was eventually discontinued as so many had been caught with the subject, it lasted for the length that it did due to the assumption that it was a cosmetic, when really it was for women of this time a vial of liberation and freedom. Number 9. Vladimir Demikhov. A very famous Soviet scientist by the name of Vladimir Demikhov was known for his innovation, organ transplants, which had saved many lives in the medical world by extending life from near-death events. However, how he came to this is just as disturbing and concerning, as it was revolutionary and innovative, and he would transplant a number of vital organs between dogs. But then he decided to experiment even further by sewing together a two-headed dog. He and his assistants would attempt to operate not just a few times, but over 24 times to create a functioning two-headed dog, and it was at the 24th time it was widely publicized. It was even featured on Life magazine, and unsurprisingly was considered a very dark, horrifying creation that had been beheld. He sewed together the head of a neck of a small dog named Shavka onto the neck of a large stray German shepherd named Brodyaga. The mad scientist created an unnatural creation at a disturbing cost. For the surgery itself, Demikhov amputated Shavka the lower body below the forelegs, keeping her heart and lungs connected until just before the transplant. Then he attached Shavka to the upper body of a corresponding incision of Brodyaga's neck. The operation lasted 3.5 hours, although both could function, and here Shavka ended up dying as she was not attached to Brodyaga's stomach, so whatever she ate fell out. And tragically, the two animals died 4 days later due to the damage of a crucial vein. The previous pair of dogs lasted for a month before they too died in a fatal end, and Vladimir also had no intention to stop his animal cruelty experiments and would continue trying until his death. Number 8. MK Ultra. Project MK Ultra was an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the CIA and intended to develop procedures and identifying drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken people and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental state and brain functions, such as a covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs and other chemicals without the subject's consent, electric shocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual, and other forms of torment. MK Ultra was preceded by Project Artichoke, and it was organized through the CIA's office and coordinated with the US Army's biological warfare labs. The program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of US and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. Investigative efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helms' order that all MK Ultra files be destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission's investigations relied on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the small number of documents that survived Helms' order. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act requested uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MK Ultra, which led to Senate hearings, but some of the surviving information about MK Ultra was declassified in 2001. Number 7. Philip Zimbardo. An American psychologist and a professor at Stanford University, was known for his involvement, leadership, and administration on the research of the Stanford prison experiment. He was heavily criticized as the experiment was seen unethical and scientific reasons. The Stanford prison experiment was a psychological experiment conducted to stimulate a prison environment to examine the effects of situational variables on participants' reaction and behaviors. Participants were recruited from the local community with an ad in the newspaper offering $15 per day to male students who wanted to participate in a psychological study of prison life. Keep in mind, $15 back then is roughly $114 today. Volunteers were chosen after assessments of psychological stability and then randomly assigned to being prisoners or prison guards. Over the following 5 days, psychological harm of the prisoners by the guards became increasingly brutal. After psychologists scientist Christina Maslach visited to evaluate the conditions. She was upset to see how study participants were behaving, and she confronted Zimbardo, and he ended the experiments on the 6th day. The SBE had been referenced and heavily criticized as an example of an unethical psychological experiment, as a harm inflicted on the participants in this and the other experiments in the post-World War II era. Because of this experiment, it prompted American universities to improve their ethical requirements and institutional review on human experiments to prevent them from being similarly harmed. The goal of Zimbardo's primary reason for the conducting of the experiment was to focus on the power of roles, rules, symbols, group identity, and situational validation of behavior that generally would repulse ordinary individuals. But with one positive result of the study is that it altered the way the US prisons are run. For example, juveniles accused of federal crimes are no longer housed before trial with adult prisoners due to the risk of violence against them. Number 6. Phalaris and Perillus of Athens. Throughout history, humans in general have created an enclave of many extraordinary things, and as civilizations go, for some reason in our distant past, they had an obsession of creating agonizing means and the inflictions of others. Perillus of Athens had created something that at first glance may seem like a work of art, but its uses had been a thing of torment: the Brazen Bull. The beautiful bronze statue casted in ancient Greece was invented between 570 and 554 BC. The statue was actually commissioned by the reign of Phalaris, an evil tyrant in Sicily. So many would think that he's actually the real inventor, or more or less had the idea. This tyrant was also known for eating new as his new cruel torment device, and the bull was cast hollow and was used as a fire would be built below, and its design was that it would be opened and a person would be forced inside. The fire would start underneath the person and it would burn as the smoke and steam would escape from the bull's nose. Incense was placed inside to counteract the smell of burnt flesh, and it is said that it was a series of tubes built inside the statue to design to distort the screams of the victim and make them sound like an animal. Phalaris was a piece of work, as he wanted to test the sound system of the bull, that he even pushed Perillus, the man who created the bull for him, into the belly and lit a fire under him. And then he later released him before he pushed him off a cliff. But by sheer karma, Phalaris died in a bull himself, as the city was taken over by Telemachus in 554 BC.
Number 10. Dracula. The man, the myth, the legend, Vlad the Impaler. This dude was so down bad, he was the inspiration for Dracula. There's really only one reason why he was so evil, and honestly, it's in his name. Vlad the Impaler liked to impale people, oftentimes alive. As if this was the worst thing thought up by a human being ever, he would leave the pikes on display, creating a horror only the eyes of medieval Europe could see. There's gonna be a lot of bad dudes on this list, some really saucy villains, unsavory characters who will make your skin crawl, but only Vlad has been bad enough to get a monster inspired by him, essentially turning his actions into somewhat of a spooky mythology. Dude gives off some serious goth energy. There's a few portraits of him, but if you look at it, he's got this stare in his eyes, like he wants to impale me or something. Vlad be nimble, Vlad be quick, just wait till you see his sharpened sticks. Number 9. The guy everyone knows. Look, YouTube won't let me say his name, but do we really have to? I mean, it's Mustache Man. Infamous for his bad art and lame book, he was the fascist leader of Germany. The very same leader who forced the world into World War II. Remember that one? Yeah, he's the very same monster who organized the destruction of Jewish peoples in Europe, and if he had his way, probably the whole world. I wouldn't be surprised if you showed a picture of him to anyone on Earth, any country, rich or poor, and they will most likely know who that was. That's the kind of evil that will get you talked about in classes all over the world, and likely for a long time. Eventually, he got what was coming to him, and the world had peace and prosperity, and there was never ever another bad stinky war ever again. Why is he not number 1, you might be asking? Well, that's just because his numbers don't compare to others, which is a very troubling statistic. I'll get to that later. Number 8. Busy man. Most people on this list are not going to need any introduction. Genghis Khan is no exception to that. The Mongol warrior king saw his nomadic empire stretch thousands of miles, being one of history's largest empires. If you've been paying attention in history class, and you should have been, don't skip class or Big Ched will put you in the naughty corner. Bad. Yes, that's right, I just referred to myself in the third person. Speaking of third person, that's how many people Genghis unalived in his bloody conquests. Oh, did I say 3? I actually meant a lot. Did I say a lot? I actually meant a disturbing amount. Some people like to point out that he was accepting of other people's cultures and beliefs. Yes, that is true, but that's after he burned down the village right before he got to yours, and you got forcibly assimilated into his numbers. As you can also imagine, a bloodthirsty barbarian like him did not treat women with much respect. It's Genghis Khan, man. That's just how it do be. Number 7. So long, Bowser. Ivan the Terrible. Okay, sure, Vlad was called the Impaler, but you can kind of take that in a different way, right? Not in that way. All innuendos aside, with a name like Ivan the Terrible, it's kind of hard to work around that. Even as a child, Ivan was showing traits of an evil dictator, or supervillain really, as it's said that he would throw animals off of tall roofs in the same way that Mario throws Bowser off of platforms. Becoming the first Tsar of Russia, and probably its worst, he's responsible for many horrors and crimes, but the most infamous being his responsibility for his own son's demise. After a heated argument regarding his unborn grandson, and in a binding fit of rage, Ivan claimed his son's life. Sure, dads get angry when sons don't help mow the lawns or help take out the trash, but that's going a little far. One minute you're having a fight with your dad, and the next minute you're being carried out by Ghanaian pallbearers. You know, the dancing guys, the memes, the casket, you know? Yeah, it's a joke. Number 6, the Mad Doctor. I love doctors. Shout out to the people working in the medical field right now. I appreciate you. I couldn't even imagine the horror that is medical school though. We all know my track record for reading, and hours upon hours of studying would just be bad for my health. I gotta squeeze more video game time in there, it's just how I work, man. However, one doctor I would not want to cross is Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. He is most likely the inspiration for a lot of horror movies. A serial unaliver, said to have been performing surgeries on animals at a young age, which, again, doing some freaky deaky stuff to animals as a kid is like the red flag of red flags. It's like the only red flag. If that wasn't enough, he used to steal cadavers from the university he was studying at and doing all kinds of not nice things to them, naughty, bad. Having a clear obsession with medical practices and anatomy probably was helpful in disposing of his victims. And like something from Tales of the Crypt Keeper, that's exactly what he did. He constructed a large house, or building really, with trap doors, secret tunnels, and a lot of rooms. A basement where he could dispose of his victims. He would later then open this house of horrors up as a hotel where unknowing people would come to meet their doom.
Yes, Tales of the Crypt Keeper. Come check in to the Hotel of Doom.
If you want to talk about ghosts, then who are you going to call? Well, you should actually probably call Dan Aykroyd. His fascination with the paranormal started because his great-grandfather was a spiritualist who held seances. Turns out there's a whole book called History of Ghosts written by Dan's dad, and it's about mediumship and his interest in it. He was the reviewer of all these psychic acts who came through town. He was associated with the Lily Dale community in New York, where you can go and get a reading from a registered psychic, and that got passed on throughout the family. They wanted to know what was going on. They wanted to know how levitation was possible, how ectoplasm is possible. Well, that all checks. The story of Mark and his family's eerie encounter with a cursed Ouija board infested home in Australia started off subtle, like their dog's reluctance to enter the house, originally dismissed as a mere adjustment to the new environment. But then, as things do, they escalated. Let's see, there was the mysterious flooding in the laundry room, shattered light bulbs, an overwhelming sense of unease in certain areas of the house that signaled something far more sinister. Disembodied laughter, shuffling feet, and phantom voices only intensified their torment. As the supernatural disturbances grew unbearable, the family decided to take action. The mom's brave confrontation with the paranormal, reading Bible verses aloud, was met with the spirit's fury, resulting in potential poltergeist activity. The peak of this terrifying tale came when the youngest member of the family miraculously survived a fall from an open window. This event was the final straw, prompting them to flee the cursed house without looking back. Burari, a nondescript neighborhood in the Indian capital of Delhi, attained notoriety after 11 members of the Chundawat family were found dead inside their home, amid whispers of occult practices. So police say 10 of them were dangling from the ceiling, and their hands were tied behind their backs, and their eyes and mouths were covered with cloth. And police have zeroed in on one of the men in the family, one Lytle Chundawat. So documents and phones that were recovered from the house hinted at Lalit's interest in spirits and ghosts. Police believe he frequently visited crematoriums, obsessively watched paranormal content, and notes found in one of the diaries hint at a strong belief that supernatural forces would intervene and save the family. And apparently it motivated the family to do what they did. The notes in the diaries laid out exactly how the family needed to carry out this act before they were to have been saved. And it looks like a lot of these instructions were carried out. These notes also refer to Thursday or Sunday as the chosen days, and police believe the deaths occurred between late Saturday night and early Sunday morning. The diaries listed out that the family needed to cover their eyes and mouths with a cloth during the ritual, and that's where we're going to end that because I'm not telling you how to do this. One night, Lorraine Warren received a voicemail from a Mrs. Sandy Foster, who nervously described a very distressing situation and begged the Warrens to return her call. Although it was 12:40 in the morning, Lorraine immediately tried to call her back, and while the phone rang, the connection wouldn't connect. The next day, Ed and Lorraine made the decision to go pay the Fosters a visit, just to be safe. Well, Mrs. Foster brought up that her daughter Meg had been really interested in the occult and had actually purchased a book on conjuring as a gift for her daughter. And based off the description of it, I think it was a copy of the Ars Goetia. The family described a plethora of instances of demonic activity, and Lorraine herself experienced an inhuman presence throughout the home. So Ed told the family he and Lorraine could handle everything, but hey, maybe just get out of the house for a little bit while we do what we gotta do. So they got to work the moment the Fosters left. They were determined to discover the true nature of the spirit's presence in order to dispel it. After a lot of work, they managed to do so, but not without a struggle. Bob Smith's fascination with this seemingly innocent painting turned into a haunting mystery when a kitchen fire devastated his grandmother's house, leaving only the painting unscathed. The eerie connection deepened when Bob later learned that the very same painting had caused similar tragedies in other households. Giovanni Bragalin's series of paintings, of which The Crying Boy was a part of, became notorious. In 1985, the Sun newspaper in the UK published a shocking account of May and Ron Hall, whose home was consumed by fire with only the cursed painting surviving unharmed. And what's truly unsettling is the firefighter's claim that he had witnessed multiple house fires where everything was reduced to ashes except for copies of The Crying Boy. The widespread reports of similar incidents fueled the belief in the painting's curse, leading to a wave of fear and destruction. Ultimately, the Sun's bonfire of these paintings marked the end of their popularity, but a few copies still linger, carrying with them the ominous aura of the inexplicable. A doll originally belonging to Robert Eugene Otto, an artist, was described as eccentric once upon a time. Neighbors of Robert used to hear him having a conversation with the doll, and this continued into his adult years. He brought the doll everywhere. He talked about it in the first person, as if it wasn't a doll, as if Robert was his own being. Well, the doll remained stored in the Otto family home until Robert the human passed away in 1974. After his death, a couple bought the house, and their daughter found the doll in the attic, and she claimed that the doll was trying to kill her. So the family got rid of it. The doll is now on display in a museum in Key West, and don't worry, the doll still curses people. His last caretaker before the museum experienced him disappear and reappear as he pleased. They heard footsteps, they heard giggling in the attic. Some folks even claim that Robert's expression changes when anybody badmouths Otto in his presence. He's also been responsible for a couple of car crashes, some divorces, broken bones, so go near him at your own risk. Famed AEW wrestler Malachi Black has a fascination with the occult because he grew up in a household that had some very disturbing and interesting things. So he knows how to create these cult-like characters on TV because, well, he grew up with it. He understands it. It was something that had a great influence on him because his grandfather would tell him incredible stories about, and well, once again folks, we're gonna get bizarre here. He would tell him stories about things that he witnessed with black magic in Malaysia. There was a type of voodoo that they used that was called guna guna, and the grandfather got involved with that. He saw it happening around the camps. Things were strung up and soldiers were sick and they couldn't find what was going on. And the villagers were like, oh, he's being subjected to this voodoo, which kind of sparked Malachi's interest. When he was growing up, he was exposed to a lot of perhaps strange things, but it really shaped his mind into questioning everything and looking at the world very differently than a lot of folks. And it made for a very interesting upbringing. He said there was a lot of difficult moments and a lot of very, very difficult growing up, very disconnected moments. It was definitely not your run-of-the-mill upbringing, but it was interesting. One night, very late at night, Ed and Lorraine Warren were contacted by the Snedeker family, who had just moved into a house on Meriden Avenue in Southington. Specifically, the mother of the family unit and a niece who came to stay with the family were on the phone. And what they found and bought, they were like, oh yeah, we had this new home. It's big and welcoming. Turns out it was a former funeral home. And the morticians at that funeral home were involved in naughty things with the dead. The sons of this new family, they were the first to start talking about the things they had seen and experienced. They were terrified. And at first the parents were like, come on guys. But these boys were so scared they were sleeping on the floor in the living room. The women who called the Warrens were terrified. They were hiding in a small bedroom in the back of the house, and the covers on the bed around them were levitating like there was a fan blowing them around. And Lorraine said that while they were on the phone, even more bizarre events started happening. The mother had rosary beads in her hand, and while she spoke, the beads were actually being pulled apart and falling to the floor. A blessing of the house seemed to do nothing to calm things down. The church eventually sent an exorcist, which seemed to do the trick, but not before one last hurrah from whatever was doing all this chaos. So there was this huge tree in front of the house, right? And half of the tree, with no wind, broke off and fell on the property. Yeah, I'd be hightailing it out of there after that. In the chilling case of the Perron family, their seemingly serene farmhouse in Rhode Island concealed a dark and malevolent secret. Soon after moving in, strange occurrences were unraveling, initially dismissed as minor inconveniences. Rooms moved on their own. The young daughters were seeing apparitions. Carolyn Perron, determined to uncover the truth, delved into the history of the house and discovered a lineage plagued by mysterious and tragic deaths spanning 8 generations. The most ominous presence of that was of Bathsheba Sherman. Bathsheba's malevolent intentions became evident as the family's life spiraled into a nightmare. One harrowing incident involved Carolyn experiencing an inexplicable puncture wound on her calf, resembling a large sewing impalement. This unsettling occurrence was just one of many tormenting episodes endured by the Perron family over their decade-long residency in the house, known as the Old Arnold Estate. Now the Warrens were summoned to help because who else? And they identified a mysterious box, which they believed acted as a conduit for Bathsheba's demonic energy to afflict the household. So they performed their blessings, they removed the malevolent object, and lived to tell the tale. Patty Donovan's innocent curiosity led her down a treacherous path when she engaged with a Ouija board, believing she'd found a friend through the board. And as she grew emotionally dependent on this entity, the malevolent spirit, once her confidant, turned into a demonic force, wreaking havoc on her entire family. It targeted their vehicles, it disassembled engines, it punctured tires. Things escalated. We're talking crazy vandalism around the home, inexplicable damage to the property, to the point of levitating furniture, rocks raining down on the house. Father Ted Donovan's desperation led him to seek help from Ed and Lorraine Warren. So upon their arrival, they knew right away there was some malevolence, and they found out about the Ouija board. So they realized, okay, this is bad, and they initiated the process for an exorcism, which sadly took a month to be granted. So during that time, the family endured more torment and destruction at the hands of the entities. Finally, exorcism takes place, liberating the family from their demonic ordeal. But they're left with a substantial financial burden because, well, extensive damage.
Number 5. Bad comrade. Stosif Jalin was the leader of the Soviet Union for probably too long. A man who worked his way up the political chain until General Secretary meant leader, which, if you look it up, it's kind of crazy. That itself is a crazy story. He's responsible for a great loss of life. It is estimated in the range of 40 million people. Ooh, yikes. Most spooky evil dudes usually go after an enemy, to someone they consider to not be part of them. He did do this, but a lot of his own people sadly met their ends from the Red Menace too. Organized and deliberate purges of people and famines to starve people. It's safe to say he is and was and always will be one of the worst humans to ever walk the face of the earth. To put it in perspective, Jalin's son was a soldier in World War II, and after being captured by German forces, the Germans thought they had one on the boss. Heck, this was a get out of jail free card, right? Well, when a prisoner trade was proposed by the Germans, Jalin laughed at only how an evil communist could, and denied the trade. His son would later perish in a POW camp shortly after. What a monster.
You think you trade with me? Keep them, I don't want.
Number 4. Fine white powder. Oh, to be in Miami in the mid-1980s. If I had one wish, it would be to spend a summer night in the neon-soaked beaches of Miami under strict laws enforced by a president who didn't know what was going on right underneath his nose. If you were around back then you probably got to experience something like that. Or at least in my fever dreams. I hope so. But as much as I'd like to be Tony Montana with all that sugar on his desk, I know it's bad for my health. Speaking of bad for your health, Pablo Escobar. I know, that's where I went with that. Probably the most ruthless criminal ever to live on planet Earth. Pablo was a poor man born in a poor country, but ended up being one of, if not the richest man on planet Earth. His lucrative distribution of adult sugar in the 80s made him very wealthy. It also made him very dangerous, as he was willing to do whatever to get his way. Extortion, bribing, bombing, just about anything you can think of. Oh yeah, he was one bad dude. He had so much money that he had to bury it all over Colombia. Every once in a while, some of his buried treasure pops up. And as much as I want a quick million in US cash, I'll just put it back where it came from. Oh, Dios mío, lo siento, Pablo. Number 3. Al Capone. Another ruthless criminal, and honestly, Capone walked so gangsters like Pablo could run. Part of the ruthless Italian mafia that was the outfit, Capone worked his way through the ranks during 1920s Prohibition America, earning millions in his time where really just $100 could stretch a long way. Capone is noted for his violent behavior throughout his life and the many accidents accidents he caused directly or indirectly. Prohibition and the Depression were hard times for a lot of folks in America. However, the media and the people of Chicago at first always wanted to see what the lavish gangster was up to, as his criminal life became somewhat publicized. Most likely due to his wealth. The dude was rich. He eventually would get arrested and sent to Alcatraz, which was probably the worst prison in America, or the best Call of Duty Zombies map, depending on how you look at things. I look at things through a Call of Duty way, so Number 2, Gavrilo Princip. That might not be a name that you're familiar with, but it was the man who unalived Franz Ferdinand, which started World War I, which caused World War II, which caused the Cold War, which caused the collapse of Soviet Russia, and it's why you live in a post-war globalist world with markets developing rapidly in the cyber world. Except maybe the whole thing in Ukraine, watch out for that. Kinda crazy to think how all that could come from one wrong turn and a guy seizing an opportunity. But this also means he's kind of responsible, in a way, for all the bad stuff that happened in those times as well. So maybe don't seize the day, I'm not sure. Just don't be ruthless criminals, guys. Watch our videos instead. Although I could blame him for failing my math test in high school. Yeah, we'll go with that. Number 1, Mao Zedong. I'd like to come out here and tell you all about the chairman of China, but that simply is just too hot for TV, and if it's too hot for TV, it's too hot for YouTube. Basically, he was the dictator of communist China and is responsible for many lives lost. It's estimated to be somewhere in the range of 60 to 80 million people. Whoa! Dude was down bad, the definition of down bad, and although many were told to adore him, there's still a great many people who remember the terrible things he's done. From Beijing to Hong Kong, there's not a person around who doesn't know who he is. If being a no-good, rotten person was an Olympic sport, he would have gold medals coming out of his ears. That's gonna wrap it up for me today, folks. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe here at Bumblebee, and if you too want to be remembered as a good person, then check out my socials linked down below. I've been your host, Big Ched, and stay sweet, my little honeybees. Blah, blah, blah. Classic. Capone worked his way through the ranks during the 1920s Prohibition era. Sorry.
Number 5, Lytle S. Adams. After hearing about the vicious attacks of Pearl Harbor on the radio, Lytle S. Adams developed a unique plan of vengeance against the Japanese Imperial Army with the Bat Bomb. The bomb consisted a bomb-shaped casting over 1,000 compartments, each containing a hibernating Mexican free-tailed bat with a small timed incendiary bomb attached. Dropped from a bomber at dawn, the castings would deploy a parachute in mid-flight and open a release of bats, which would then disperse to eaves and attics in a 20-40 mile radius. Adams stated that the bat was the lowest form of animal life and that until now, reasons for its creations have remained unexplained. He went on to espouse that bats were created by God to wait this hour to play their part in the scheme of free human existence to frustrate any attempt of those who dared desecrate our way of this life. This weird device was then of course proved by President Roosevelt, who's remarked that his friend wasn't crazy, but the idea was worth looking into. Either way, after the conducted of a few tests, the program was eventually cancelled after it was estimated a use of $2 million, or in today's value $32 million, was wasted on this invention. When it comes to war, humans showcase the worst of the worst if it means of expanding their nation's political planning, and if you're in the military, there's an internal conflict to fill in your nationalism and your internal duty to serve the country, and you forget your economical issues. When it comes to the invention of war, as it has been showcased throughout history time and time again, even in current unfortunate events, the creation leads to genocide by means of invention of different kinds of warfare. Developed by Fritz Haber, who was a professor at the University of Karlsruhe, was a brilliant chemist who invented the industrial scale productions of ammonia-based fertilizer. Alongside Frederick Guthrie, the two was noted as the ones who weaponized and synthesized a vescent chemical warfare agent called mustard gas, a widely used weapon used during World War I by both sides of the conflict with particularly harmful and deadly effects. It was responsible for the 1,205,655 non-fatal casualties and 91,198 deaths. The effects range from minor symptoms such as skin irritation and conjunctivitis to severe lung damage when inhaled. Despite the horrific use of mustard gas during World War I, there was a silver lining: the discovery of the first modern chemotherapeutic agent based on observations of World War I survivors exposed to mustard gas. The studies eventually launched an era of cancer chemotherapy research. Number 3, Oliver Winchester. An American businessman and politician named Oliver Winchester was best known for his founding, manufacturing, the marketing of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, aka the Winchester rifle. The first official Winchester rifle was a model in 1866. Repeating rifles was not widely used until after the war, when they became increasingly popular with the civilians. Military authorities concentrated primarily on perfecting breech-loading single-shot rifles for many more years. His ownership was then passed to his son, who died of TB, and his wife Sarah Winchester ended up moving to California with inheritance as she began to make the famed famed Winchester house, a haunted mystery house due to her fear of spirits being murdered by the rifle. Number 2. Dow and Company. Originally developed to simply enhance the growth of soybeans, Agent Orange was weaponized and used extensively during the Vietnam War. During the war, Dow, Monsanto, and other companies were compelled by the US government to produce Agent Orange under the US Defense Production Act of 1950. Used in large quantities, it was a powerful herbicide used by the United States to deforest the jungles and destroy Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army crops. The United States military sprayed upon up to 20 million gallons of herbicides over Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia from 1961 through 1971, covering over 4.5 million acres. Agent Orange was often proven afterwards to cause very serious health problems for both Vietnamese people and returning US military personnel and their families. Among were rashes, birth defects, and severe neurological problems, as well as cancer. This military action has caused the nation of Vietnam. Since then, the country has reported over 400,000 of their people were maimed and killed by the harm of the herbicides, that 500,000 of their children have been born with birth defects caused by the exposure of Agent Orange. The US courts, of course, have constantly ruled that Dow and other manufacturers bear no responsibility for the development and the use of Agent Orange during the Vietnam War and have dismissed all legal claims to the contrary. And finally, number 1, Oppenheimer. An American theoretical physicist and director of the Manhattan Project Los Alamos Laboratory during World War II, is often called the father of the atomic bomb, causing the destruction and devastation of the Japanese as it resulted the tragedies of 200,000 civilians and military personnel. The ethics of these bombings and the roles in Japan's surrender are subjects of debate. Oppenheimer did important research of the theoretical astronomy as well as the quantum field theory and the extensive of quantum electric dynamics. But with his interests that led him to the development of these weapons still hold to this day dire consequences on the lives that it would affect. In a very famous quote to his recognition, he has said, "If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once in the sky, that would be like the splendor of the mighty one. Now I have become death, the shatter of worlds." In a meeting he had with President Truman, he was distraught at the invention as it was now readily usable at the hands of practically anyone. And President Truman was infuriated at Oppenheimer when he said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands," responding that he, Truman, bore sole responsibility for the decision on the atomic bomb against the Japanese, which later Truman said, "I don't want to see that son of a bee in this office ever again." The Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons aimed to reduce the spread of nuclear weapons, but its effectiveness has been questioned. Modernization of weapons continue to this day. Bombs alike have been proved with its massive casualties and results to devastation, eradication, genocide of innocent people, and the tragedy of wars it inhibits in our modern times. That's all for today, and I hope you learned something cool. And for your next riddle, are you ready? What has a bottom at the top? Be sure to put your answer in the comments below and I'll reveal the answer to the next video, Top 10 Messed Up Acts Performed by Evil Queens. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one.